You think you're clever? Prove it. The words cut through the tense air of a Manhattan auction house, spat by a smug CEO at a young black logistics assistant. She stands firm, her calloused hands clutching a contract, her mind sharp despite the weight of a world that's never played fair. This 23-year-old, once a student of digital art and law, has endured dropped dreams, family debt, and the sting of being underestimated. Mocked for her job, dismissed for her race, she's faced locked doors and whispered slurs. Yet in this moment, a spark ignites, a chance to turn the tables. Will her brilliance shatter the elite's game, or will power crush her fight? Stick around to uncover her triumph. Subscribe for our latest stories and drop a comment. Where are you tuning in from? Trust us, you won't want to miss how this unfolds. The air in Artsphere's Manhattan backroom hung heavy with the scent of turpentine and old wood. Dim fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting stark shadows across crates and canvases stacked like forgotten dreams. Jasmine Evans, 23, moved with quiet precision, her sneakers scuffing softly against the concrete floor. Her braids tied back in a neat bun, swayed as she knelt beside a mixed-media graffiti piece. A vibrant explosion of spray paint and collage, crafted by a Harlem artist whose name barely whispered through the auction world. Her fingers, rough from years of hauling crates, traced the edge of the canvas. This wasn't just art, it was a pulse, a story of streets and survival. Jasmine's gray artsphere polo clung to her skin, damp from the morning's rush to prepare for the charity auction. The event was a glittering affair, a chance for Manhattan's elite to flaunt their wealth under the guise of generosity. But here, in the underbelly of the auction house, Jasmine's world was one of checklists and deadlines. She pulled a bilingual provenance certificate, English and French, from a folder, her eyes scanning the dense legal text. Her mind, sharpened by half-finished courses in digital art and law at Pratt Institute, caught every clause, every loophole. She'd left school when her father's heart condition drained their savings, but the knowledge lingered, a fire no hardship could extinguish. The door swung open, and a gust of cool air swept in. Blake Harrington, Artsphere's CEO, strode through, his tailored navy suit a stark contrast to the room's grit. At 45, he was a titan in the art world, his sharp jaw and piercing green eyes commanding every space he entered. His reputation preceded him, a man who built a global auction empire but scoffed at street art, calling it luxury trash in glossy interviews. Today, his presence was a storm cloud, his polished loafers clicking with purpose. A small entourage of assistants trailed him, clutching tablets and whispering updates about the gala. Jasmine stood, brushing dust from her knees, and nodded politely. Blake's gaze flicked to her, then to the canvas. His lips curled into a smirk. "What's this?" he asked, voice dripping with disdain. "Another graffiti scribble pretending to be art?" The assistants stifled nervous laughs, their eyes darting to Jasmine. She felt the familiar sting of being sized up, her worth measured by her job title and the color of her skin. But she held her ground, her chin lifting slightly. "It's mixed media, sir," Jasmine said, her tone even, "by a Harlem artist. The provenance ties it to a 2018 street festival with an NFT for digital rights." She held up the certificate, her voice steady despite the heat rising in her chest. Blake's smirk widened, his eyes glinting with something crueler than amusement. He stepped closer, snatching the document from her hand. The room seemed to shrink, the hum of the fluorescence growing louder. "You think you're clever?" he said, his words slicing through the air like a blade. "Prove it. Tell me what this means." The challenge hung heavy, a gauntlet thrown at her feet. The assistants froze, their tablets forgotten. A forklift operator in the corner paused, his eyes wide. The back room, usually a hive of motion, stilled as if the world held its breath. Jasmine's pulse quickened, but her face remained a mask of calm. She'd faced worse. Landlords demanding rent her family couldn't pay, professors who assumed she'd fail, strangers who crossed the street when she passed. This was just another test. She took a slow breath, her dark eyes locking onto Blake's. "It's a bilingual provenance and licensing agreement," she began, her voice clear, deliberate. "English and French, detailing the artwork's origin and ownership chain. It includes a non-fungible token for digital reproduction rights. tied to a blockchain ledger. Her finger pointed to a clause halfway down the page. But there's a flaw. Clause 4B omits mandatory EU art law disclosures, making the contract void in France and Quebec. If this sells tonight, it could be contested in court, and Artsphere would lose millions. Blake's smirk faltered, his brow creasing. The assistants exchanged glances, their silence deafening. Jasmine pressed on, her voice gaining strength. Worse, the NFT royalty split is vague. It doesn't specify the artist's percentage after secondary sales. That's a legal gray zone. If the estate challenges it, you're looking at a class action lawsuit from every artist you've tokenized. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. You're not selling art here, Mr. Harrington. You're selling risk. The room was a vacuum, every sound swallowed by the gravity of her statement. Blake's hand tightened around the certificate, his knuckles whitening. For a moment, his confidence cracked, revealing something raw, shock perhaps, or grudging respect. He handed the document back, his movements slow and deliberate. How do you know this? He asked, his tone quieter now, almost curious. Jasmine met his gaze unflinching. I studied it, she said simply, before life had other plans. The words carried the weight of her past. Nights spent reading law journals by a flickering lamp, days balancing hospital visits with diner shifts to keep her family afloat. Her passion for black art, from Basquiat's raw defiance to the murals of Harlem, had fueled her studies. She knew the stakes of every contract, every signature, because she'd seen what happened when people signed without understanding. Blake studied her, his green eyes narrowing as if seeing her for the first time. The assistants shifted uncomfortably, sensing a shift in the air. You're wasted back here, he said finally, his voice low. Come to my office after the auction. We need to talk. He turned, gesturing for his entourage to follow, and strode out, leaving the door swinging in his wake. Jasmine exhaled, her shoulders loosening slightly. The forklift operator gave her a subtle nod, a flicker of solidarity, before returning to his work. She tucked the certificate back into its folder, her hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. The canvas beside her seemed to glow brighter, its colors a testament to resilience. She thought of the artist, a name the art world barely knew, and felt a spark of purpose. This wasn't just about one contract, it was about every story buried under the elite's indifference. As the back room buzzed back to life, Jasmine's mind raced. Blake's offer was a door cracked open, but she knew the world beyond it. Artsphere's glass towers were a maze of power and prejudice, where someone like her, a black woman with no degree, no connections, would be watched, judged, and tested. She'd seen the way curators dismissed black artists, how auctions undervalued their work. Stepping into Blake's world meant stepping into a fight. She glanced at the canvas one last time, its bold strokes a silent challenge. Jasmine straightened, smoothing her polo. The auction was hours away, the gala's chandeliers waiting to dazzle. But for now she had crates to move, contracts to check, and a fire in her chest that no one, not even Blake Harrington, could snuff out. Tonight she'd walk into his office, not as a logistics assistant, but as someone who'd already proven her worth. What came next she couldn't predict, but she was ready to face it. Head high, eyes sharp, and heart unyielding. The executive floor of Artsphere's Manhattan headquarters gleamed like a polished blade, all glass walls and chrome accents, reflecting the city's restless pulse. Jasmine Evans stepped off the elevator, her sneakers silent on the marble, her gray polo swapped for a thrifted black blazer that hugged her frame. The charity auction had ended hours ago, its glitter fading into the night. But Blake Harrington's summons lingered in her mind. Her pulse thrummed, not with fear, but with the weight of possibility. She clutched a worn notebook, its pages filled with scribbled notes on NFT contracts and art law, relics of a life interrupted but never abandoned. The receptionist, a woman with a sleek bob and a smile too tight to be genuine, glanced up. Name? She asked, her tone clipped. Jasmine's jaw tightened. She'd spent years in Artsphere's back rooms, yet here on the 32nd floor, she was a stranger. Jasmine Evans, she said, voice steady. Mr. Harrington's expecting me. The receptionist's eyes flicked over her, lingering on the blazer's frayed cuff, before she nodded toward a hallway. End of the corridor. Jasmine walked past glass-walled offices where executives in tailored suits hunched over laptops, their voices a low hum of deals and deadlines. The air smelled of espresso and ambition, a far cry from the turpentine-soaked backroom she knew. At the hallway's end, a heavy oak door stood ajar. She knocked once, then entered. Blake sat behind a mahogany desk, his suit jacket draped over a chair, sleeves rolled up to reveal a Rolex glinting in the lamplight. Across from him stood Margaret Pierce, artsphere's COO, her pearl choker catching the glow like a noose of elegance. At 50, Margaret's sharp cheekbones and icy blue eyes made her a formidable presence. Her reputation as a gatekeeper whispered in every auction house from London to Tokyo. "Miss Evans," Margaret said, her voice smooth as silk but edged with condescension. "How unexpected." She offered a smile that didn't reach her eyes, her gaze sweeping over Jasmine as if cataloging flaws. Blake gestured to a leather chair. "Sit," he said, his tone brisk but not unkind. Jasmine settled into the seat, her notebook resting on her lap, her posture unyielding. She felt Margaret's scrutiny like a cold draft. But she'd faced worse. Creditors' calls, hospital bills, the weight of a family's survival. "Last night," Blake began, leaning forward, "you caught something our legal team missed. That contract could have cost us millions." His green eyes studied her, searching for the spark he'd seen in the back room. "I want you to audit our NFT contracts, full access to our digital archives. You'll report to Margaret." Jasmine's stomach tightened. Margaret's smile tightened too, her fingers adjusting her choker. "A bold choice," Margaret said, her tone laced with something sharp. "But Miss Evans, this isn't a classroom. Our contracts are complex. Perhaps you'd benefit from further study?" Jasmine's fingers curled around her notebook, her nails pressing into the cover. "I've studied enough," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I know what a bad contract looks like, and I know what it does to artists who can't fight back." Margaret's smile faltered, a flicker of irritation crossing her face. Blake raised a brow, amused. "Then prove it," he said, echoing his challenge from the night before. "Start tomorrow. Margaret will get you set up." The meeting ended with a nod, but as Jasmine rose, Margaret's voice stopped her. "One more thing, dear," she said, the word dear dripping with patronizing sweetness. "This world moves fast. Don't fall behind." Jasmine met her gaze, unflinching. "I won't," she said, and walked out, the door clicking shut behind her. The next morning, Jasmine sat at a sleek desk in a corner office, a stark contrast to the backroom's chaos. A monitor glowed with artsphere's digital archive, rows of NFT contracts and auction records stretching back years. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, her eyes scanning clauses with the precision of a surgeon. She'd always loved the logic of contracts, the way they could protect or betray, depending on the words chosen. But as she dug deeper, a pattern emerged. Paintings by Black artists, vibrant works from Harlem, Oakland, Chicago, consistently sold below their estimated value. A Basquiat-inspired collage projected at $200,000 had closed at $140,000. A muralist's NFT valued at $50,000 fetched half that. Jasmine paused, her breath catching. She opened a contract for a recent sale, a vibrant piece by a Detroit artist. The digital signature caught her eye. Margaret Pierce, time-stamped hours before the auction. The starting bid had been slashed by 30%, a handwritten note citing market trends. Jasmine's chest tightened. This wasn't a mistake, it was deliberate. She cross-referenced another file, then another. The pattern held. Black artists' works were systematically undervalued, their NFT royalties capped at fractions of industry standards. She leaned back, her mind racing. At Pratt, she devoured books on art history, tracing the lineage of Black creators like Jean-Michel Basquiat, whose raw genius was exploited until his death. She'd written papers on how auction houses shape value, often at the expense of marginalized voices. Now she was seeing it firsthand. Her fingers itched to call Malik, her childhood friend whose hacking skills had unraveled more than one neighborhood mystery. If anyone could dig into artsphere's digital shadows, it was him. That evening, Jasmine slipped into a Harlem cafe, its walls adorned with local art, bold murals and framed sketches that pulsed with life. The smell of roasted coffee mingled with the faint hum of jazz from a corner speaker. Malik, lanky with a fade and a grin that could disarm anyone, slid into the booth across from her. "What's the play, Jazz?" he asked, sipping a latte. She slid her notebook across the table, open to a page of contract IDs. "I need you to trace these," she said. "Metadata, timestamps, anything that shows who's touching them and why." Malik's eyes gleamed. "Corporate dirt? I'm in." He pulled out a battered laptop, its stickers peeling, and began typing. Jasmine watched, her thoughts drifting to the artists whose work she'd handled. Creators who poured their souls onto canvas, only to be cheated by a system that saw them as disposable. She thought of her father, his hands once steady with a paintbrush before illness stole his strength. Art had been their family's language, a way to dream beyond Brooklyn's cracked sidewalks. As Malik worked, Jasmine's phone buzzed, an email from Margaret. "Your access is active. Don't overstep." The words felt like a warning shot. She deleted it, her resolve hardening. Back at her desk the next day, she dove deeper into the archives, her focus unbreakable. But a shadow loomed. In the break room, she overheard Margaret on a call, her voice low but unmistakable. "Artists like them don't need high bids. They should be grateful we're showing their work at all." The words landed like a slap, raw and deliberate. Jasmine's hands froze on her coffee mug, her reflection in the glass warped by the city's skyline. She returned to her desk, her heart a drumbeat of anger and purpose. Margaret's words weren't just prejudice, they were policy, woven into artsphere's machinery. Jasmine opened another contract, her eyes narrowing at a clause that funneled NFT profits to an offshore account. She jotted it down, her pen digging into the paper. This wasn't just about one artist or one sale. It was about a system that thrived on silence. And Jasmine Evans, with her notebook and her fire, was done being silent. The Brooklyn apartment where Jasmine Evans lived was a patchwork of survival. Peeling yellow wallpaper, a sagging couch, and a kitchen table scarred from years of late-night meals. At 2 a.m., the only light came from her laptop, its screen casting a blue glow across her face. Her braids hung loose, framing eyes that burned with focus as she pored over artsphere's contract archives, cross-referencing clauses with notes scrawled in her notebook. The hum of a distant siren seeped through the window, a reminder of the city that never slept, much like her. Jasmine's fingers danced across the keyboard, chasing the digital footprints of Margaret Pierce's manipulations. Across from her, Malik sprawled on a folding chair, his laptop balanced precariously on his knees. His fingers flew, cracking through layers of encrypted email logs like a thief picking locks. "This is deep, Jazz," he muttered, his voice a mix of awe and unease. "Your COO's playing dirty. Offshore accounts, hidden signatures. She's got a whole system." Jasmine nodded, her jaw tight. She'd suspected Margaret's bias ran deeper than words, but seeing it laid bare, profit streams siphoned from black artists' work, felt like a blade twisting in her gut. They'd been at it for hours, fueled by instant coffee and the weight of what they were uncovering. Malik's latest find was a bombshell, an email chain buried in ArtSphere's servers, time-stamped weeks ago, where Margaret instructed a subordinate to reroute NFT royalties to a Cayman Islands shell company. The metadata showed her login, a digital fingerprint she couldn't erase. Jasmine leaned closer, her breath catching. "That's theft," she whispered. "Legalized, but theft." She thought of the artists, painters, muralists, dreamers, whose work was devalued while Margaret's accounts grew fat. Her mind flashed to a lecture at Pratt, where a professor had said, "Whoever controls the contract controls the art's worth." Jasmine had scribbled it down, sensing its truth even then. Now she was living it. She opened a new document listing every affected artist, their works, and the altered contracts. Each name felt like a vow, to right a wrong, to give voice to those silenced by greed. But the deeper she dug, the heavier the stakes became. Margaret wasn't just a gatekeeper, she was a predator, and Jasmine was in her crosshairs. The next morning, Jasmine arrived at ArtSphere's executive floor, her blazer crisp despite the sleepless night. Her desk, tucked in a corner of the open plan office, felt like a battlefield. She logged into the archive, her heart sinking as a red error flashed, access denied. She tried again, then checked her email. A message from security, CC'd to Margaret, read, "Your account is under review for suspicious activity. Report to HR immediately." Jasmine's stomach churned. This wasn't a glitch. It was a trap. Margaret had sensed her probing, and now she was striking back. She stood, smoothing her blazer, and headed to the security office. The guard, a burly man with a clipboard, barely looked up. "System flagged you," he said, his tone flat. "Stay out of the archives until cleared." Jasmine's voice was calm, but her hands clenched at her sides. "Who flagged me?" The guard shrugged, already turning away. She left, her mind racing. Margaret was tightening the noose, using protocol to silence her. But Jasmine wasn't done yet. That evening, she met Alma Carter, a 60-year-old painter whose vibrant canvases had once lit up Harlem's galleries. They sat in Alma's cramped studio, surrounded by half-finished works and the smell of linseed oil. Alma's hands, gnarled from years of brushwork, trembled as she spoke. "Artsphere promised me a big sale," she said, her voice soft but heavy. "They sold my NFT, said it'd make me thousands. I got $200, the contract. I didn't understand it." Jasmine's chest ached. She saw her father in Alma's weary eyes, his art abandoned when illness struck. "They took your rights," Jasmine said, her voice firm. "I'm going to find out how." Alma handed her a faded contract, its fine print a maze of jargon. Jasmine scanned it, spotting Margaret's signature on an amendment that capped Alma's royalties at 1%. Standard rates were 10 times that. "This isn't right," Jasmine said, her pen circling the clause. Alma's eyes glistened. "I trusted them," she whispered. Jasmine reached out, squeezing her hand. "You're not alone anymore." The promise felt like a weight, but one she was ready to carry. Back in Brooklyn, Jasmine's phone buzzed with an anonymous email. "Stop digging, or we'll sue for breach of confidentiality." The words were a cold slap, but she deleted the message, her resolve hardening. She called Malik, who was still combing through artsphere servers. "They're scared," he said, his voice crackling over the line. "Found another email. Margaret's covering her tracks, but she missed a backup. Give me a day." Jasmine nodded, though he couldn't see her. "Be careful," she said. "They're watching." The next day, artsphere felt like a cage. Jasmine's access was still locked, her desk now under scrutiny from passing colleagues. Whispers followed her. Troublemaker, overstepping. Who does she think she is? She ignored them, focusing on a hard copy of a contract she'd printed before the lockdown. It was another black artist's work, a sculpture sold for pennies compared to its appraised value. The pattern was undeniable, a systemic theft hidden in plain sight. As she left the office, her phone buzzed again. Another anonymous message. "You're out of your depth. Quit now." Jasmine's fingers hovered over the screen, her heart pounding. She thought of Alma, of the artists whose dreams were stolen, of her years spent fighting for scraps. She typed a single word, "No," and hit send. The defiance felt like fire, burning away her fear. In her apartment that night, Jasmine sat cross-legged on the floor, her laptop balanced on a crate. Malik's latest find glowed on the screen, a spreadsheet detailing Margaret's royalty diversions, linked to a dozen artists. Jasmine's hands shook as she saved it to a secure drive. This was proof, undeniable and damning. But using it meant war, a war she wasn't sure she could win. She thought of her father, his voice weak but proud. "You're stronger than they know." She closed her laptop, the room dark except for a sliver of moonlight. Margaret thought she could bury her. But Jasmine Evans was just getting started. The Harlem Community Center smelled of fresh paint and possibility, its walls alive with murals that danced in the late afternoon light. Jasmine Evans stood at the center of a small circle of artists, her thrifted blazer swapped for a denim jacket, her braids loose and swaying as she spoke. The group, painters, sculptors, muralists, all black, all wounded by artsphere's greed, listened with a mix of hope and skepticism. Jasmine's voice, steady but fierce, cut through the hum of a nearby radiator. They've been stealing from you, she said, holding up a stack of printed contracts. Not just money, but your legacy. We can stop it, but only together. Her eyes met Alma Carter's, the older painter's gaze a quiet anchor. Alma nodded, her gnarled hands clasped tightly. Others hesitated, their faces etched with fear. A young sculptor, barely older than Jasmine, spoke up, his voice trembling. If we fight, they'll crush us. Artsphere's got lawyers, money, power. Jasmine's chest tightened. She knew that fear, years of scraping by, of doors slammed shut by those who saw her as less. But she leaned forward, her voice softening. They're counting on us to stay scared. Let's prove them wrong. The meeting had been her idea, born in the sleepless hours after Margaret Pierce locked her out of Artsphere's systems. Jasmine had spent days compiling evidence. Emails, altered contracts, royalty diversions. Each piece a brick in a case against the COO's empire of theft. But evidence alone wasn't enough. She needed allies, voices to amplify the truth. This dimly lit room, with its cracked linoleum and folding chairs, was her first battlefield. Malik, her hacker friend, had come through hours earlier, his voice crackling over a late-night call. Got something big, he'd said, sending her a video file. Jasmine played it now on a borrowed projector, the grainy footage flickering against a bare wall. Margaret's face filled the screen, her tone clipped as she addressed a room of Artsphere staff. Prioritize white artists for the high-value slots, she said, her words cold and deliberate. Their work drives bids. The others, they're filler. Gasps rippled through the artists. Alma's hand flew to her mouth. Jasmine paused the video, letting the silence speak. This is who's been setting your prices, she said. This is why your work sells for pennies. The room buzzed with anger, fear, and resolve. Alma stood, her voice shaking but clear. I've lost too much to stay quiet. Jasmine's right. Don't let them take our voices too. The sculptor nodded, then another artist, and another. Jasmine felt a spark ignite, fragile but growing. She handed out a list of next steps, collecting statements, signing affidavits, and preparing to go public. This stays between us, she warned. They're watching. That night, Jasmine sat in her Brooklyn apartment, the city's pulse seeping through the walls. Her laptop glowed with a draft email to Blake Harrington, attaching Malik's video and a summary of Margaret's schemes. Her finger hovered over the send button, her heart pounding. Blake had given her a chance, but his loyalty to Artsphere and Margaret made him unpredictable. She thought of her father, his frail hands sketching even in a hospital bed, urging her to fight for what mattered. She hit send, the soft click echoing like a gunshot. The response came faster than expected. Blake's email was brief. Meet me tomorrow, 8 a.m. Bring everything. Jasmine exhaled, her shoulders sagging. But relief was short-lived. By morning, her phone buzzed with a new threat. A post on an art gossip site, anonymous but vicious. Artsphere's new consultant is a dropout scammer, digging where she doesn't belong. The post linked to her old Pratt records, her family's debt, painting her as a fraud. Jasmine's stomach churned. Margaret's hand was unmistakable, a calculated strike to discredit her before she could strike back. At Artsphere, the executive floor felt colder, the glass walls reflecting eyes that followed her every move. Jasmine clutched her notebook, now bulging with printouts and sticky notes, as she entered Blake's office. He stood by the window, his suit immaculate, his expression unreadable. Show me, he said, gesturing to a conference table. Jasmine spread out her evidence. Emails, contracts, the video, her voice steady as she walked him through Margaret's system of devaluing black artists. Blake's jaw tightened, but he said little, his silence a wall she couldn't breach. This could ruin us, he said finally, his voice low. The gala's in 2 weeks. If this leaks, investors will bolt. Jasmine leaned forward, her eyes locked on his. It's already ruining people. Artists who trusted you are losing everything. Blake rubbed his temple, caught between empire and ethics. I need time, he said. Keep this quiet. Jasmine nodded, but her trust in him wavered. Time was a luxury the artist didn't have. Back at her desk, the whispers grew louder. Colleagues avoided her, their glances sharp with suspicion. Jasmine's phone buzzed again. A new post, this one calling her a troublemaker who'd never belong in artsphere's world. Her hands shook, but she pushed through, emailing Malik to tighten their security. "They're circling," she wrote. "We need to be bulletproof." His reply was instant. "On it. Stay sharp." That evening, Jasmine returned to Harlem, her steps heavy. The community center was dark, but a light glowed in Alma's studio. She found the older artist at her easel, painting a figure that looked eerily like Jasmine, bold, unbowed, crowned in vibrant hues. "You're carrying a lot," Alma said, not looking up. Jasmine sank into a chair, the weight of the day crashing down. "What if I fail them?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Alma set down her brush, her eyes fierce. "You're already winning by fighting. Don't stop now." The words steadied her, a lifeline in the storm. Jasmine pulled out her phone, checking the artist group's encrypted chat. Messages poured in, pledges of support, scanned contracts, stories of loss. The sculptor had written, "I'm in. Let's burn it down." Jasmine smiled, small but real. She was no longer alone. But the next morning, a new blow landed. An email from artsphere's events team, CC to Margaret, read, "Your invitation to speak at the International Auction Gala has been rescinded due to scheduling conflicts." Jasmine's blood ran cold. The gala was her chance to reach the art world, to expose Margaret before a global audience. Margaret had struck again, cutting her off at the knees. Jasmine stared at the screen, her mind racing. She thought of the murals in Harlem, their colors defying every attempt to erase them. She wouldn't be erased either. Not now, not ever. The Midtown ballroom shimmered under a constellation of chandeliers, their light fracturing across gilded walls and the polished shoes of Manhattan's elite. The International Auction Gala, artsphere's crown jewel, pulsed with the energy of wealth and ambition. Collectors in tuxedos, critics with notepads, influencers snapping selfies for a live stream beaming to millions. Jasmine Evans stood at the edge of this opulent chaos, her thrifted blazer sharp against the sea of couture. Her heart thundered, not from the crowd's roar, but from the weight of the USB drive in her pocket, heavy with evidence that could topple an empire. Margaret Pierce had barred her from speaking, but Jasmine had no intention of staying silent. She'd slipped into the gala with the help of Lena, a logistics assistant who'd seen her struggle and whispered, "Go get him." Lena's keycard had bypassed security, letting Jasmine blend into the staff bustling with auction catalogs and champagne flutes. In her bag, she carried flyers printed that morning, each bearing a QR code linked to a cloud server where Malik had uploaded their evidence. Margaret's emails, doctored contracts, and the damning video. Jasmine had scattered them outside, tucked them into programs, and slipped them under chairs. A quiet rebellion now spreading through the crowd. On stage, Margaret stood radiant in a pearl gray gown, her smile a mask of control as she addressed the audience. "Tonight we unveil artsphere's new NFT framework," she said, her voice smooth as velvet. "A revolution for artists, ensuring fairness and transparency." The crowd applauded, unaware of the lie. Margaret gestured to a screen displaying a contract template, its terms predatory, capping royalties, locking artists into perpetual exclusivity. Jasmine's fists clenched. This was the final blow, designed to bind black artists to artsphere's greed, while Margaret basked in applause. Jasmine moved through the shadows, her sneakers silent on the carpet. She reached the tech booth, where a harried AV tech glanced at her badge. Lena's, borrowed for the night. "I'm with the presentation team," Jasmine said, her voice steady. The tech, distracted by a buzzing headset, waved her in. Her hands trembled as she plugged the USB into the projector system, her breath shallow. This was it. No turning back. She glanced at the stage where Margaret was introducing a guest curator, her confidence unshakable. Jasmine's resolve hardened. She'd been underestimated her whole life, by landlords, professors, and now Margaret. Tonight, that ended. The screen flickered and a murmur rippled through the crowd. Margaret's voice faltered as her polished slides vanished, replaced by an email chain. Her own words, cold and calculated, "Reduce bids on black artists' lots. Their work doesn't drive revenue." The ballroom gasped, a collective inhale that sucked the air from the room. Jasmine stepped onto the stage, seizing the microphone from a stunned assistant. Her blazer caught the spotlight, its frayed cuffs a badge of her fight. "This is the truth about artsphere," she said, her voice ringing clear, amplified to millions watching online. "Margaret Pierce has been stealing from black artists, rigging auctions, slashing royalties, hiding profits in offshore accounts." The crowd erupted, shocked whispers, angry mutters, phones raised to capture the moment. Margaret's face drained of color, her eyes darting to the screen as it cycled through evidence. Altered contracts, a spreadsheet of diverted funds, the video of her ordering staff to prioritize white artists. Jasmine held up a flyer, the QR code bold against the white paper. "Scan this," she said. "It's all public now. Every email, every lie. This isn't just fraud, it's erasure, targeting artists who fought to be seen." Margaret lunged for the microphone, her composure shattering. "This is a fabrication," she hissed, her voice shrill. "She's a disgruntled employee, a liar." But the crowd wasn't hers anymore. Phones lit up as attendees scanned the QR code, the live stream chat exploding with hashtags, "Ryu, Artsphere fraud, Ryu, justice for artists." Jasmine stood firm, her gaze locked on Margaret's. "You thought you could silence us," she said, her words ablade. "You thought we wouldn't fight back." From the front row, Blake Harrington rose, his suit rumpled, his face a storm of conflict. The room quieted, every eye on him. He climbed the stage, his steps deliberate, and took the microphone from Jasmine's hand. For a moment she braced for betrayal, her heart pounding. But Blake turned to the crowd, his voice steady. "She saw what none of us saw," he said, his words carrying the weight of confession. "Without her, Artsphere would be just another fraud." He faced Margaret, his eyes hard. "You're done." The crowd roared, a wave of applause and outrage. Security moved in, their hands gentle but firm as they escorted Margaret off stage, her protests drowned by the noise. Jasmine stood frozen, the microphone still warm in her hand. The spotlight burned, but she felt exposed, raw, as if the world could see every scar she'd carried. Her father's illness, her lost dreams, the years of being invisible. Yet the applause wasn't pity, it was belief, a tide lifting her higher than she'd ever stood. She stepped back, her breath uneven, and handed the microphone to the MC, who scrambled to regain control. The screen looped the evidence, each frame a nail in Margaret's coffin. Jasmine slipped off stage, her legs unsteady, and found Lena in the wings, her eyes shining. "You did it," Lena whispered, pulling her into a hug. Jasmine nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. Her phone buzzed. Malik, texting from Brooklyn. "You're trending. We won." But victory felt fragile, a flame that could gutter if she let it. The gala continued, a surreal blur of bids and speeches. But the air had changed. Collectors whispered about reform, critics typed furiously, and the live stream comments surged with support. Jasmine lingered in the shadows, watching as Blake addressed the crowd, promising transparency and accountability. His words were measured, but she saw the strain in his jaw, the cost of his choice. She wondered if he'd stand by her when the fallout came, when investors balked, when the art world's knives came out. As the night wound down, Jasmine stepped outside, the city's pulse a steady hum. Her blazer felt too tight, her chest heavy with what she'd done. She'd torn down a wall, but the war wasn't over. Margaret's allies would retaliate, and Artsphere's board would question her place in their world. She thought of Alma, of the artist waiting for justice, and felt a quiet resolve settle in her bones. Her hand brushed the flyers in her bag, a few still unclaimed. She left one on a bench, its QR code glinting in the streetlight, a beacon for anyone ready to see the truth. Jasmine walked toward the subway, the city's neon glow a canvas of possibility. She'd stepped into the light tonight, but the shadows still loomed. Her fight was far from over, and she was ready, scarred, fierce, and unbreakable. The morning after the International Auction Gala, Artsphere's Manhattan headquarters felt like a storm's aftermath. Hushed voices, wary glances, and the faint hum of crisis. Jasmine Evans stepped off the elevator onto the executive floor, her denim jacket replaced by a crisp navy blazer. its thrifted seams a quiet defiance against the glass and chrome opulence. Her braids were pulled into a tight bun, her eyes sharp despite the weight of a sleepless night. The gala's seismic reveal, Margaret Pierce's fraud exposed on a global stage, had left the art world reeling, and Jasmine at its epicenter. Her phone buzzed with notifications, news alerts, messages from Malik, and a cryptic summons from Blake Harrington. She silenced it, her focus a blade honed by resolve. In a sterile conference room, Blake stood at the head of a polished table, flanked by artsphere's board. Their faces, a gallery of tailored suits and tight-lipped frowns, turned to Jasmine as she entered. The air was thick with tension, the kind that follows a public reckoning. Blake's voice was grave. "Margaret Pierce has been terminated," he announced, his green eyes flicking to Jasmine. "Effective immediately. She faces criminal investigation for fraud and embezzlement." Murmurs rippled through the room, but Jasmine's expression remained steady, her hands clasped behind her back. She'd expected this, but the victory felt hollow, shadowed by what came next. Blake gestured to a chair. "Sit, Miss Evans. We've created a new role for you, Director of Digital Rights and Inclusion. You'll oversee our NFT contracts and artist policies." The offer landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples of shock through the board. A silver-haired executive coughed, his discomfort palpable. "With respect," he said, "she's young, uncredentialed. This is a high-stakes position." Jasmine's jaw tightened, but Blake cut in, his voice firm. "She's the reason we're not bankrupt. She's earned this." The room fell silent, and Jasmine took her seat, her posture unyielding. The title was a shield, but she knew it wouldn't stop the arrows. Her first task was a public apology, drafted by artsphere's PR team and delivered by Blake on a live-streamed press conference. Jasmine stood off camera, her arms crossed as he pledged reform, transparent contracts, equitable valuations, and reparations for affected artists. The words were polished, but she saw the strain in his shoulders, the cost of dismantling a system he'd helped build. Social media erupted with praise, but also skepticism. Artsphere redemption clashed with Archie, too little too late. Jasmine's role was hailed as a bold move, yet whispers of tokenism trailed her like smoke. Back in Harlem, Jasmine channeled her energy into action. She founded the Black Artists' Rights Fund, a nonprofit to provide legal aid and grants for creators cheated by the industry. The fund's first recipient was Alma Carter, whose vibrant canvases had been devalued by Margaret's schemes. Jasmine visited Alma's studio, now buzzing with preparations for a solo exhibition, her first in 2 decades. Alma's hands, steady with a paintbrush, gripped Jasmine's in gratitude. "You gave me back my voice," she said, her eyes glistening. Jasmine smiled, but the weight of others still waiting pressed on her chest. "We're just starting," she replied, her voice soft but fierce. At Artsphere, Jasmine's new office overlooked the city's skyline, a far cry from the backroom crates she once hauled. Her desk was piled with contracts, each one a chance to rewrite the rules. She spent hours auditing NFT terms, ensuring artists received fair royalties and clear rights. But resistance lingered. A group of investors, their names a roster of old money, sent a letter questioning her experience and urging a more seasoned director. Jasmine read it once, then filed it away, her resolve unshaken. She answered with results. At the next auction, a Harlem painter's mural sold for a record $1.2 million, its value untainted by manipulation. The investors went quiet, but Jasmine knew they were watching, waiting for her to falter. The backlash wasn't just corporate. Online, trolls fueled by Margaret's allies called Jasmine a diversity hire, her every move dissected on art forums. One post stung deeper than the rest. "She's using race to climb. Where's her degree?" Jasmine's fingers hovered over her phone, tempted to respond, but she closed the app instead. She thought of her father, his voice a faint echo. "They'll try to dim you. Shine anyway." She did, pouring her energy into the fund, securing grants for 3 more artists by week's end. One evening, Jasmine spoke at Harlem's Community Center, the same space where she'd rallied artists weeks ago. The room was packed, teenagers with sketchbooks, elders in Sunday hats, local creators whose work adorned the walls. She stood at a makeshift podium, her blazer swapped for a hoodie emblazoned with a Basquiat crown. "Your art is power," she told the crowd, her voice resonating with conviction. "It's your story, your legacy. Don't let anyone steal its worth." A young girl in the front row, her braids adorned with beads, raised her hand. "How do we fight back?" she asked. Jasmine knelt, meeting her eyes. "Learn your rights, read every contract, and never sign what you don't understand." The crowd erupted in applause, their belief a warmth that steadied her. After a muralist approached, his hands were stained with paint. "My sister's sculpture was sold cheap last year," he said. "Can your fund help?" Jasmine nodded, handing him a card. "We'll start tomorrow." As the room emptied, she lingered, tracing a mural of a black woman crowned in gold. It reminded her of Alma's painting, of the strength she carried for others. But alone, doubt crept in. Could she sustain this fight? Or would the art world's weight crush her? Her phone buzzed, pulling her back. A text from Malik. "Fund site just hit 10K visits. You're changing the game." She smiled, small but real. Another message followed from Blake. "Board's impressed with the auction. Keep pushing." The praise felt fragile, a truce rather than trust. Jasmine pocketed her phone, stepping into the Harlem night. The air was crisp, the streets alive with music and laughter. A neon sign flickered, casting her shadow long and bold. She walked past a wall tagged with fresh graffiti, a silhouette of a woman holding a contract, her fist raised. It wasn't her, not exactly, but it felt like a mirror. Jasmine paused, her breath catching. She'd torn down one wall, but others loomed. Investors, skeptics, a system that resisted change. Yet the fun was growing, artists were rising, and her voice was no longer a whisper. She thought of the girl with the beaded braids, of the muralist's sister, of every creator waiting for their moment. For them, she'd keep fighting, one contract, one canvas, one truth at a time. The Pratt Institute classroom buzzed with the quiet hum of creativity, pencils scratching, laptops humming, and the faint scent of acrylic paint lingering in the air. Jasmine Evans sat near the window, her spiral notebook open, her pen tracing notes on blockchain-based copyright law. Sunlight streamed through, catching the beads in her braids, which swung gently as she leaned forward, absorbing the professor's lecture. At 23, she was back where she'd once dreamed, a digital art and law student with a full scholarship. Her return to Pratt a hard-won triumph after years of sacrifice. Yet her nights belonged to Artsphere, where her role as Director of Digital Rights and Inclusion demanded relentless focus. Jasmine thrived in this dual life, her heart a forge where ambition and justice melded. Her mornings began early, crossing Brooklyn's waking streets to reach Pratt's campus. The lecture halls, with their high ceilings and worn wooden desks, felt like a homecoming, each class a step toward reclaiming the education illness had stolen. But Jasmine wasn't the wide-eyed freshman she'd been. She carried scars, her father's frail hands, her family's debt, the art world's venom. Her classmates, a mix of young dreamers and older returnees, cast curious glances, whispering about her role in Artsphere's scandal. She ignored them, her pen moving with purpose, her mind sharp as ever. By afternoon, Jasmine was in Harlem, at a community art studio alive with color and chaos. Canvases leaned against walls, their bold strokes echoing the streets outside. She stood before a group of teens, her blazer swapped for a paint-splattered hoodie, leading a workshop on artist rights. Among them was Aisha, a 12-year-old with bright eyes and a sketchbook clutched like a shield. "How do I know my art won't get stolen?" Aisha asked, her voice small but fierce. Jasmine knelt, meeting her gaze. "Read every contract," she said, her tone warm but firm. "Know your worth. I'll teach you how." Aisha nodded, her pencil moving with new confidence, and Jasmine felt a quiet pride bloom, a seed planted for the future. Her evenings were consumed by a new project, an NFT transparency app, designed to let artists track their royalties and rights in real time. In Artsphere's Innovation Lab, a glass-walled space humming with servers, Jasmine collaborated with coders, her vision taking shape on glowing screens. The app, still in beta, featured clean interfaces and plain language guides, ensuring accessibility for creators like Alma or Aisha. She'd tested it in Harlem, where local artists praised its simplicity. One muralist, his hands stained with spray paint, grinned after a demo. "This would have saved me thousands," he said. Jasmine's smile hid the exhaustion of late-night coding sessions, fueled by coffee and conviction. Blake Harrington's support was a double-edged sword. He'd publicly endorsed her app, pledging ArtSphere's resources, and announced a fund for Black artists during a high-profile auction. Yet his gestures felt performative, a salve for his guilt. Jasmine kept her distance, wary of being tethered to his redemption arc. In a rare meeting, he leaned across his mahogany desk, his green eyes searching. "You're changing us," he said, almost earnest. "Let me help more." Jasmine's response was measured. "I'm building this my way," she said, her voice steady. "For the artists, not the headlines." Blake nodded, but she saw the flicker of unease. He wasn't used to being refused. Her app's progress wasn't without friction. Some ArtSphere developers, loyal to the old guard, dragged their feet, citing technical constraints. Jasmine pushed back, leading late-night huddles to troubleshoot code, her presence a quiet command. She thought of her father sketching in a hospital bed, his art a defiance of pain. That memory drove her, each line of code a brushstroke on a new canvas, one where artists held power. One Saturday, Jasmine returned to the Harlem studio, where Aisha waited with a gift, a sketch of Jasmine, depicted as a queen with a graffiti crown, her eyes fierce and kind. The drawing, rendered in vibrant markers, stole Jasmine's breath. "It's you," Aisha said, shy but proud. Jasmine traced the lines, her throat tight. "It's perfect," she whispered, hugging the girl. Later, she hung the sketch in her ArtSphere office, its colors a beacon amid the sterile chrome. It reminded her why she fought, not for titles, but for those who saw themselves in her. Yet doubts lingered. At Pratt, a professor praised her paper on NFT ethics, but added, "Your story's inspiring, but stay grounded." The words, meant kindly, stung like a warning. "Don't rise too high." At ArtSphere, a board member cornered her after a meeting, his smile patronizing. "Your app's ambitious, but scale back. We can't alienate collectors." Jasmine's response was cool. "I'm not here to comfort collectors, I'm here for the artists." She walked away, her heart pounding, aware of the tightrope she walked. One evening, alone in her Brooklyn apartment, Jasmine sat on the floor, her laptop open to the app's dashboard. Harlem's beta testers had logged hundreds of sessions, their feedback glowing. "Easy to use. Feels like power." She smiled, but exhaustion tugged at her. The city's hum seeped through the walls, a lullaby of horns and voices. Her phone buzzed, a text from Malik. "App's killing it. You're a legend." Another from Alma. "My show's sold out. Thank you." Jasmine's eyes stung, not from fatigue, but from the weight of their trust. She thought of Aisha, sketching with fearless strokes, and of the artists whose work now commanded fair prices. Her app wasn't just code, it was a shield, a voice for those long silenced. But the art world's shadows loomed, collectors who resisted change, systems that bent but didn't break. Jasmine closed her laptop, the room dark except for a sliver of streetlight. She stood, stretching, and glanced at Aisha's sketch, now propped on a crate. The graffiti crown gleamed, a challenge to keep going. As she stepped onto her fire escape, Harlem's skyline stretched before her, its murals glowing under neon. Jasmine's breath steadied, her resolve a quiet flame. She'd painted a new canvas, but the work wasn't done. For Aisha, for Alma, for every artist waiting, she'd keep building, line by line, fight by fight, until the art world saw them all. The marble corridors of the U.S. Capitol gleamed under vaulted ceilings, a labyrinth of power where every footstep echoed with history. Jasmine Evans stood at the threshold of a hearing room, her navy blazer crisp, her braids swept into an elegant knot. At 23, she was an unlikely figure here, a black woman from Brooklyn whose voice had shaken the art world. Her hands gripped a leather binder, its pages heavy with testimony on NFT copyright reform. The air was thick with anticipation, the hum of aides and reporters a distant pulse. Jasmine's heartbeat was steady, tempered by months of battles won and scars earned. She was no stranger to scrutiny, but today's stage was vast, her words poised to ripple beyond Harlem streets. Inside, senators sat behind a polished dais, their faces a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Jasmine took her seat at the witness table, her gaze unflinching as the chair called her forward. "Miss Evans," he began, "you've exposed systemic issues in the art market. Tell us why NFT copyright matters." She leaned into the microphone, her voice clear and resonant. "It's about power," she said. "Artists, especially Black creators, are stripped of their rights through predatory contracts. NFTs could empower them, but without reform, they're just another tool for exploitation." She shared her journey, not as a victim, but as a fighter who'd uncovered artsphere's fraud and built a fund to protect others. The room listened, rapt, her truth a beacon in the sterile chamber. Back in Harlem, Jasmine's Black Artists' Rights Fund was thriving. She'd partnered with Malik to launch a free online course on copyright law. Its modules downloaded by thousands. Schools across New York adopted it, teaching teens to navigate contracts with confidence. At a community center workshop, Jasmine watched a 15-year-old boy annotate a mock NFT agreement, his brow furrowed with focus. "This could have saved my uncle," he said, his voice soft. Jasmine nodded, her chest tight. Each student was a victory, a step toward a world where artists weren't prey. But the art world's shadows persisted. Former allies of Margaret Pierce, now scattered but vengeful, launched a smear campaign. A blog post, thinly veiled, accused Jasmine of manipulating Blake Harrington for personal gain. Social media amplified it, trolls branding her a grifter who played the race card. Jasmine scrolled through the venom one night in her Brooklyn apartment, the city's hum a faint comfort through her window. Her fingers hovered over a reply, but she closed her laptop instead. She'd learned at Pratt that silence could be a strategy, letting results drown out noise. Her fund's grants had empowered 20 artists, their work now commanding fair prices. That was her answer. She channeled her energy into a new project, an exhibition titled Art Unerased, held in a Harlem warehouse transformed into a gallery. Its walls showcased works by artists Margaret had cheated, Alma's vibrant canvases, a sculptor's towering steel forms, a muralist's neon-lit panels. Jasmine walked through the opening night, her hoodie swapped for a silk blouse, her eyes scanning the crowd. Collectors mingled with locals, their murmurs a mix of awe and guilt. A London critic called it a reckoning in color, her review going viral. Reporters swarmed Jasmine, their questions sharp. "Is this revenge?" one asked. She smiled, cool and composed. "It's justice. These artists were always here." The exhibition's QR code linked to her NFT app, now live beyond Harlem, its user base swelling. A Chicago painter texted her mid-event, "Sold my first token at full royalty. You're a hero." Jasmine's heart lifted, but she knew heroes were fragile. She thought of Aisha, whose sketch of her as a crowned queen hung in her office, a reminder of why she endured. At the expo's close, Alma pulled her aside, her eyes fierce. "You've given us a stage," she said, pressing a small canvas into Jasmine's hands, a lotus blooming in defiant hues. Jasmine hugged her, the gesture anchoring her in a world of fleeting praise. The smears didn't stop. A former ArtSphere executive emailed ArtSphere's board, alleging that Jasmine's fund misallocated grants. The accusation was baseless, but it forced her to spend hours defending her work, her binder now a shield of receipts and audits. She met Blake in his office, his desk cluttered with auction catalogs. "The board's rattled," he said, his tone weary. "Push through." Jasmine nodded, but her trust in him was thin. She'd built her victories without his full backing, and she'd do it again. Her response was public, a Twitter thread detailing the fund's impact, backed by artist testimonials. The thread went viral, Nush Art Unerased trending for days. A Harlem muralist tweeted, "Jasmine saved my work. She's the real deal." The support drowned out the trolls, but Jasmine stayed vigilant, her nights spent refining the fund's transparency. Malik's course grew too, its platform now hosting webinars with legal experts. A Baltimore teen emailed, "I used your app to keep my art safe. Thank you." Jasmine saved the message, a talisman against doubt. One evening, at a national art conference in D.C., Jasmine stood on a panel, her voice carrying to a packed auditorium. She spoke of systemic bias, of contracts as weapons, of art as resistance. The crowd rose in applause, but a senator's words lingered after. "You've changed how we see art, injustice." Jasmine smiled, but her heart whispered caution. The work was unending. Back in Harlem, she walked past the warehouse, now a community hub, its walls tagged with fresh murals. One depicted a woman with a raised fist, her silhouette echoing Aisha's sketch. Jasmine paused, the city's pulse a quiet drum. She'd sparked a movement, but its echoes demanded she keep running. Faster, fiercer, for every artist still unseen. The artsphere auction hall thrummed with anticipation, its chandeliers casting prisms across a sea of velvet chairs. Jasmine Evans stood center stage, her silk blouse catching the spotlight, her braids woven into an elegant crown. At 23, she was no longer the logistics assistant who'd once hauled crates in the shadows. Tonight, she unveiled her NFT transparency app, now adopted by thousands of artists worldwide. Its clean interface a shield against exploitation. Her voice, as steady and resonant, filled the hall. "This app isn't mine," she said, her gaze sweeping the crowd of collectors, critics, and creators. "It belongs to every artist who's ever been cheated, every dreamer who refused to sign away their soul." The applause was thunderous, a tide of belief that lifted her heart. But Jasmine's eyes remained sharp, aware of the battle still ahead. She stepped off stage, her sneakers silent on the polished floor, and slipped into Harlem's night. The city's pulse, horns, laughter, the clatter of a distant train, wrapped around her like a familiar song. She walked toward a mural that had become a local legend, a silhouette of a woman clutching a contract, crowned in gold, her fist raised. It wasn't her, not exactly, but it was her fight, etched into the brick by an artist she'd never met. Nearby, Aisha, now 13 and bold with a paint can, added strokes to a new mural, her braids swinging as she worked. Jasmine paused, watching the girl's fearless lines. "Looks good," she called. Aisha grinned, paint smudged on her cheek. "Gotta keep up with you." Earlier that day, Blake Harrington had summoned Jasmine to his office, his mahogany desk a fortress between them. "We're launching a new division for Black art," he said, his green eyes earnest. "Co-lead it with me." The offer was a glittering trap, a chance to reshape Artsphere from within. But Jasmine saw the strings, his need to tether her success to his redemption. She leaned back, her voice cool. "I'm focused on my fund and my students," she said. "That's where the real work is." Blake's jaw tightened, but he nodded, a rare flicker of respect in his gaze. She left, her resolve a quiet fire, choosing her path over his crown. Jasmine's Black Artists' Rights Fund had grown into a beacon, its grants empowering creators from Oakland to Miami. She'd spent weeks at Pratt, balancing law lectures with fun work, her nights a blur of emails and mentorship. But today was for family. At a community exhibition in Harlem, she found her father, his frame stronger now, his eyes bright as he admired a canvas by a funded artist. "You did this," he said, his voice thick with pride. "Things I never dared dream." Jasmine hugged him, her throat tight. His recovery, mirrored in the vibrant art around them, felt like a victory carved from years of struggle. The exhibition was a tapestry of resilience, sculptures gleaming under string lights, murals pulsing with color, a jazz trio weaving magic through the crowd. Jasmine moved among the guests, her hoodie adorned with a Basquiat-inspired crown. A young sculptor thanked her for a grant that had saved his studio. An elder gifted her a beaded bracelet, calling her our warrior. Each gesture anchored her, a reminder of why she'd fought, not for applause, but for these moments, where art and justice intertwined. As dusk fell, Jasmine returned to the mural wall, where Aisha was finishing her piece. A girl with a sketchbook, her eyes blazing. "Want to learn something?" Jasmine asked, pulling a mock contract from her bag. Aisha sat cross-legged on the pavement, her curiosity alight. "Never sign what you don't understand," Jasmine said, guiding her through the clauses, her pen pointing with precision. Aisha nodded, absorbing each word, her future already brighter. Jasmine watched her, a quiet egg blooming. This was her legacy, not in headlines but in a girl's fearless gaze, in a community's reclaimed voice. The streetlights flickered on, bathing Harlem in a golden glow. Murmurs of music drifted from a nearby stoop, blending with the city's restless heartbeat. Jasmine thought of the fund, now supporting hundreds, and her app, a global shield for creators. She'd testified before Congress, faced smears, and built a movement. But the art world's shadows lingered, systems slow to bend, skeptics ever watchful. Yet she stood taller now, her scars a map of triumphs. Aisha packed her paint, her mural glowing under the neon. "You staying?" she asked. Jasmine smiled, her eyes soft. "Always." She glanced at the mural of the crowned woman, its lines a silent vow to keep fighting, for Aisha, for her father, for every artist whose work deserved to shine. As she walked home, Harlem's streetlights cast her shadow long, a silhouette of resilience woven into the night. Thank you for joining us on Jasmine Evans' journey, a story of courage, justice, and the power of art to rewrite the rules. Her fight for Black artists and her unyielding spirit have left us inspired, and we hope they've sparked something in you too. What moved you most? Was it Jasmine's defiance, her bond with Aisha, or the murals that lit up Harlem? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your reflections. And don't forget to tell us where you're tuning in from. Your support keeps these stories alive, so hit that subscribe button to catch our next tale of triumph. Thank you for being part of this community, for listening, and for believing in change. Until next time, keep shining your light just like Jasmine. We'll see you soon with another story that'll grip your heart and soul.